On today's World Insight, the Xi-Trump meeting is one of the most anticipated events at the upcoming G20 summit. Can face-to-face talks diffuse tension? And with the U.S. drifting away from global leadership, some say, to isolationism, how will emerging powers cooperate in a multipolar world? Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you on CGTN. This year's G20 summit will be held in Osaka, Japan this week. Chinese President Xi Jinping will attend the event. Hotly anticipated is an encounter between the Chinese leader and his U.S. counterpart. The expected meeting is seen as a key in solving their country's trade dispute. Take a look. Uncertainties and doubts, tug of wars. Can the world still come to a consensus and eventually agree on a roadmap? All eyes are on the G20 summit. Will it bring more hope or more uncertainty? I will be there, taking you up close with the epicenter of global powers, making sense. World Insight Special at the G20 summit in Osaka, Japan on CGTN.
Some say Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is caught between two commitments. One is to maintain a sound U.S.-Japan alliance amidst continued trade pressures from Washington. The security pact has to remain strong, but Abe is also determined to fight unilateralism, which challenges President Donald Trump's America First policy. The other commitment is to soar Sino-Japan relations and accelerate economic cooperations, increasing Japan's direct foreign investment to China and regional economic corporations. More than ever, Abe places importance in Sino-Japan relations. Ties between the Republic of Korea turned sour over wartime issues, while Abe and Trump have a contradicting stance on DPRK affairs. Abe needs China's support more than ever. Japan also seeks tighter cooperation with China on regional development projects, but China-U.S. trade friction is forcing Abe to take cautious steps.
For more on the G20 summit, especially the meeting between President Xi Jinping from China and President Donald Trump from the U.S., we have with us from Hong Kong, Yoshikazu Kato, Adjunct Associate Professor at the Asia Global Institute from University of Hong Kong. Of course, he is a Japanese citizen. In Washington, U.S., we have Hong Chuan, non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and also former executive managing director of the Institute of International Finance. Last but not least, in our Beijing studio, Professor Liu Baocheng, Dean from the Center for International Business Ethics from the University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Is there any danger, Mr. Kato, that the overall bigger picture should be discussed about the world be sidetracked by the bilateral discussion between China and the United States?
Now, including Japan, every parties are focusing on what's going on between U.S. and China. So I think now, at this moment for Japan, it's a good time for exercise leadership to integrate the discussion and making the relatively healthy direction for coordinating our economic policies among the 20 members. But what's going on? We have to see some meeting between President Trump and President Xi Jinping. So anyway, it's a good time for Japan to provide this platform. At least this is a good thing for the rest of the world.
Professor Liu, on the other hand, how will China-U.S. discussion, which nobody is expecting any ultimate result for this round of discussion during the G20 summit, as long as they talk, it's already quite a success. Or if they agree to talk, it's already the success that people would expect. So how much do you think, Professor Liu, that the bilateral discussion will be shaped within the context of the G20? Will it be anybody's favor between these two parties?
We keep our fingers crossed. The best we can see is that they may set a sort of credible agenda as how to move forward. And because there was a good example set forth at the end of last year in Argentina when the two presidents met.
We don't want to forget, even though the talks in Argentina was quite a constructive and engaging one between the two sides, things eventually went south in a way as a result of the tactics and strategies applied by both sides for a negotiation. So, Mr. Tran, how much expectation should we have about this bilateral engagement?
I think that number one, the fact that the two presidents agree to meet again is a positive sign. So we should see what can come out of that. Having said that, I think that it is really unlikely for the presidents to come up with anything substantive. The best that one can hope for is agreement to renew and restart the discussion and negotiation between the two sides. And the two lead negotiators probably will be in Tokyo ahead of the summit to begin talking and preparing for the leaders. The key issue is that there are a whole range of differences between the two sides, and therefore some may be amenable to compromises and agreement, but some other are more structural and very difficult to resolve in any time in the foreseeable future.
Professor Liu, now, if we understand it right, because there's no confirmed description from either side between the two countries about what exactly has led to the failure specifically from the last breakdown of the negotiation. So what really can we accept? How will that be shaped this time in this context of the G20? Will multilateral possibilities and approaches be able to encourage these two players, China and United States, to come closer about future talks?
Well, this is very difficult to predict because, you know, by basic rationale, yes, when, you know, the entire villagers or, you know, the notaries from the entire village are really watching, you know, two guys are fighting with each other, they would really look at the entire interest of the village, because the integrated global supply chain will mean that any of the negative fight or deconstructive fight can really have very negative impact on the rest of the members. So, I mean, it is very difficult to predict because simply, you know, Donald Trump may just, you know, flip onto the wrong side of the bed and come up with very new ideas that can, you know, that's maybe an occasion for him to show that he has a stronger teeth and he has a stronger hand. So that's why we still have to be prepared for different types of scenarios.
But the attitudes from the others are also important. Mr. Kato, if I could. In a way, of course, nobody wants to stand in teams right now, because when two of the largest economies have differences, the others do not want to be the collateral damage. That's just well understand. However, on the other hand, the others could be instrumental in pushing both sides to understand the ultimate importance of reaching a deal and the urgency of reaching a deal for everybody, even though it is a deal between the two economies. So, Mr. Kato, will others, though, play instrumental role, or they have their own little calculations which could make the negotiation between the two largest economies becoming even more unpredictable?
Yes, I think Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, he is quite ambitious to reach some kind of consensus or agreement among G20. But Japanese diplomacy has been always functional and pragmatic. So I think at this moment, you know, now at this moment, already President Trump and President Xi Jinping agreed to meet to each other in Osaka, and this means something like success for Japan, because Japan, you know, can provide this platform. And you know, now we have been, you know, looking at, you know, how, you know, disastrous or how difficult the trade negotiation between U.S. and China has been. But now, at least, you know, now Japan could push two sides to sit down and meet together.
Yeah,
right? So this is a very good signal for market.
Okay.
Can I raise one doubt? I mean,
Yeah.
To mediate differences, the mediator must command respect from those who are at disputes. I really wonder whether Japan or Mr. Shinzo Abe can really at least earn the respect or command the respect from at least from Donald Trump to successfully mediate this issue.
I'm not sure whether anyone can really mediate the issue if you know the nature of the issue. For our discussion's sake, both our Japanese and our Chinese guests, the question really is how will others also play their role? Could be limited, but create some kinds of atmosphere in which both parties, China and the U.S., would feel the urgency and the significance of continue to talk. That is the issue. And whether the others going to be, in a way, push the two sides to shape their issues also with the urgent issues facing the rest of the world about trade, about economic development, about globalization. That is really the issue. Mr. Tran, how do you see those possibilities?
Yes, I think there are possibilities, but it is also very clear that the other countries following the dispute between the U.S. and China, and basically the series of unilateral actions by the U.S. really are focusing more on arranging trade arrangement among themselves in a series of regional and bilateral trade agreements to secure markets and stable trading rules for themselves. In Asia in particular, I think Japan has played a very important role in pushing forward and complete the CPTPP after President Trump pulled out of TPP 2 years ago, and CPTPP is now concluded and begin to function, and I think that is a good step forward to show that a rule-based trading system is important for the prosperity of the countries involved. For China, I think that the project that I can see ahead of us is the RCEP, the Regional Cooperative Economic Partnership, which the ASEAN Summit last weekend reaffirmed that they will try to complete by the end of this year. So these regional initiatives will begin to fill the void and to contribute to the rule-based trading system.
I think that's a great point, isn't it, Professor Liu, that there are tools that could work as good case studies and examples if China and the United States want to seek aspirations from the other parties that are involved in the G20 summit. But the issue really is, will the two parties even have the opportunity to seek aspirations while they are trying very hard to deal with one another and deal with the unpredictability as we have seen in some leadership right now? Professor Liu.
I think there are two issues here that can really create uncertainty. One is that, okay, big guys showing big egos, and by discarding the interest of the world has their own responsibility as the leader of a big nation. And the other is that other members can really morally, okay, support liberalism, support collaboration, integration, etc. But they may have their own agenda to shop for the best favor within this type of strange period of relationship.
Many of the issues discussed by the G20 in the summit are also critical issues in the bilateral negotiations between China and the United States. How to deal with the global supply chain, what to do with the intellectual property rights, and how to do with the security online. All of these issues are functioning on a bilateral basis and also on a multilateral basis, almost key for this year's theme of the G20 summit. So with those making into consideration, will that be more complicated than just a bilateral meeting itself, Mr. Tran? Is there bigger hope or less hope to be successful in having another episode in the bilateral discussion after the G20 summit? Mr. Trump.
I think that the multilateral issues that Japan, as the chair for this year G20, has been able to raise is very important for the global economy. Things like reform of the WTO, things like setting regulation for the e-commerce and digital trade, including the free flow of digital information with trust, the way the Japanese characterize it, setting the trade and investment for sustainable development, and last but not least, tackling climate change. However, these important issues, important as it is, and important to be raised and discussed in the G20 forum, I think that at the end of the day, between U.S. and China, there are very significant structural differences that needs to be discussed and ironed out. Without settling on those differences, it will be difficult for the whole global economy to move forward like before.
Well, the G20 summit is also a place in which you could see the exercise of leadership of various governments and leaders from around the world. So what kind of type of leadership are China and the United States likely to establish in front of the eyes of the other economies? And how will that have an impact on this on this bilateral discussion between China and the U.S.? Professor Liu, you have some thoughts?
Well, because in terms of the entire trade and investment between these two biggest economies, and also how much interlinked with the rest of the world in the entire supply chain, is really something that the whole world are really very concerned. You can see that any type of change or any signal between these two countries in terms of the trade war is really being responded very quickly and dramatically by the stock market around the globe. So therefore, seeing how both sides, after fights, quarrel, and ultimatum, can these two sides come down to basic ration that, okay, there are a lot of commonalities that we can work together, and there are a lot of issues that we can work together more constructively by engaging dialogue, by engaging participation of other G20 and also the world members at large. So this is really a test of their wisdom, of their willingness, and also their sense of responsibility.
Thank you so much for the three of you for joining us. Yoshikatsu Kato, Liu Baocheng, and Han Chuan. Thank you so much, gentlemen. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. The U.S. is drifting away from global leadership, some say, to isolationism. Is it true? How will emerging powers cooperate in a multipolar world, particularly in the upcoming G20 summit? We're going to ask that question to many of our panelists later. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you on CGTN. We continue our discussion on the G20 Osaka summit. On Monday, China's foreign ministry held a press conference on President Xi Jinping's visit to Japan for the meeting. Assistant Foreign Minister Jiang Jun called the G20 a key platform for global policy coordination and said China hopes to contribute to a fruitful summit. He also called on other countries to uphold multilateralism and seek common solutions that rise above short-term interests. In recent years, rising unilateralism and protectionism have brought uncertainties to the global economy. Can the Osaka summit provide a platform for discussion in a positive direction? For more on the G20 summit, especially on the multipolar world order, we are joined by a strong panel. In New Delhi, Madhav Nalapat, UNESCO Peace Chair and Director of the Geopolitics on International Relations at Manipal University. In Moscow, we have Mark Sloboda, an international relations security analyst. In Washington, D.C., Han Tran, non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and former executive managing director at the Institute of International Finance. And joining us in our Beijing studio, Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics from the University of International Business and Economics. Strong panel, therefore I ask the direct questions. Will this year's G20 be remembered by the U.S.-China engagement or all players' interactions about some of the ultimately important questions facing our world today? Professor Nalapat.
Well, I'd like to say that the U.S.-China problem is not going to go away for the simple reason it's about much more than trade. It's about the fact that China is catching up with the United States and could emerge as the #1 economy in the world. If that happens, that has immense consequences for American soft power. The dollar, for example, is the reserve currency of the world.
Okay.
If America is not the world's leading economy, that there may be a de-dollarization. The U.S. controls most of the supply chains, most of the logistics chains. Today, China is getting a bigger and bigger role in many of these supply and logistics chains. So the U.S. essentially wants to roll back the prospect of China overtaking it, and that is the trade war. It's not going to go away with a G20 or even 20 such meetings.
But as you may know, Professor Nalapat, very briefly, if you can, sir, that nobody expects there's going to be any ultimate result in the bilateral discussion between China and the United States. As we mentioned in the earlier discussion, the best result probably is both sides agree to talk even more after the G20 summit. And therefore, are you saying without any result concretely between China and the United States, this year's G20 summit is going to be paralyzed in any discussion? Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the U.S. is likely to find itself isolated. The European partners are embarrassed. Japan, even Japan, from the remarks I heard just now, seems very embarrassed. And President Xi has reached out to India, reached out to Japan, reached out to the European countries, reached out to all the members of G20, including the United States. So what we're going to see is a contrast between President Xi and President Trump, in which one says, okay, it's my way or the highway, and the other person says, let's go for win-win solutions. So I can see, frankly, this kind of a disconnect between the U.S. president and the Chinese president at the G20. And I don't believe it's going to be a failure. I think it's a good opportunity for leaders to get together, to meet, and understand each other.
Well, G20 has always been a wonderful platform, Mr. Sloboda, for all leaders coming from the G20 economies to showcase their styles and the qualities of their leadership. But that is not the issue here. The issue is whether there's going to be anything reached at the end of the day by the G20 economies. Remember, Argentina, very difficult, and this time probably even more, some say.
Yeah, I agree with everything that our colleague from New Delhi said, everything. I also agree with you that we are seeing the emergence of camps, right? And then these aren't simply on the issues of trade, but these are larger geopolitical blocks that are becoming more and more self-evident with every passing year. And while the European Union countries, Japan, Australia, Canada, others, while they may not be happy with Trump, they are perfectly willing to sit and wait him out over a couple years, more years of Donald Trump's chaos. They will simply wait him out.
Mr. Trump from Washington, let me ask you seriously about this, that what will set the agenda of the G20, particularly the multilateral discussions going on among the 20 economies? That is a serious question to be asked. Of course, there are themes for this year, there are topics, but what will set the agenda and how to make sure multiple players will really have their fair share of say when setting the agenda? That is the issue.
Well, usually the country holding the chair of the G20 each year play a key role in getting their colleagues around the G20 table to agree on an agenda. And this year, Japan has done that early on. And basically, last week at the meeting of the finance ministers and other ministers in Fukuoka in Japan to prepare and pave the way for the summit later this week, I think that Japan has been able to push forward several worthwhile and important initiatives that can be very useful for the international community. And I mentioned only two. One is to start discussion to have regulation for the new digital trade and e-commerce, which is a very important and fast-growing part of the global economy, but yet has not been set in a proper supervisory framework to allow it to develop safely and useful for the user. So I think that is a very important initiative, in particular the emphasis on the free flow of digital data, which is the crux of the digital business. And the second part is to prepare to have policy and reform to get ready for the aging of societies, which is fast catching up with many countries. And Japan, being the oldest society now on earth, is clearly very aware and sensitive of that topic. And the fact that they put it on the agenda of the G20, I think, is a good step.
Professor Liu, let me put it in the other way. That is how crucial it is for this year's G20 summit to be able to bring consensus at least on some of the topics listed as the main themes for discussion this year. How much does that mean for the international community as a whole about that countries could still have their voices heard and countries could still consult one another about important issues?
Yes, the G20 at this moment is really taking place among a whole bunch of clouds that are hanging in the air. People cannot really see through what is really lying ahead. Yes, it is a demonstration of personality of those big leaders, but more importantly, it's really what type of consensus that is really we are being able to build towards the current reality and particularly the current challenges. Technology, digital technology, intellectual property protection in a new type of environment, and of course, sustainable development, etc. Although climate change is not really listed, but labor issues, social welfare and demographic issues, etc., etc. Yes. So yes, at least they really build a consensus to be aware of those issues, of those challenges. But I do not think that any type of realistic solution can really be reached, because this is really not the expectation for a 2-day or 3-day discussion, but rather, whether Japan can continue to play a role until the next round of G20 as a secretariat to drive home certain issues. So I think that's a test. It's not how humble or how constructive or how friendly Mr. Shinzo Abe is for the next for this meeting.
If I remember right,
how to follow up.
If I remember right, 2016, China was the host for the G20 summit. Well, of course, the geopolitics then was very different from what it is now, and many say there were quite a number of consensus being reached by parties then attending the G20 summit. Now, Mr. Trump, things have been changing dramatically. But we all understand in politics, it's very important eventually how you shape it and put it onto paper in real words in which the leaders of the G20s will be able to sign on. This is very crucial. It really significantly demonstrates whether one summit is successful or not. So, Mr. Trump, to you, how to use framework and how those framework will be articulated in the eventual paper if there were any communique at the end of the day. How do you see that potential? What advice would you give as an economist when you look at the paramount tasks facing our leaders today?
I think it would be very useful if the meeting could come up with something to reaffirm the need for cooperation and the need for a global framework to conduct trade and investment. But I think that as we can see the communique from the 2018 summit in Buenos Aires, such a clear support statement probably will not find a consensus to be made to be included in the final communique. So let's see if things can change this year compared to last year. Basically, what has happened is under presidency of Donald Trump, the U.S. has clearly identified several issues concerning China, and it would want to see China address those issues before it can resume business as usual. And I think that at the end of the day, despite the hope that I can hope to see the G20 can bring forth several important initiatives and useful initiatives that I highlighted, I fear that the bilateral fight between the two countries will overshadow the G20 process.
But Professor Nalapat, I mean, you understand this very well, that China, India, together with some of the other emerging economies, such as Russia and also Brazil, for example, are having very different views compared to some of the developed economies. So when we are expecting something to be developed as a consensus, will there also be camps when it comes to these kinds of policy discussion during this year's G20 summit? Is it going to be a plus or a minus for the overall possibility for reaching consensus?
Well, the fact of the matter is that Donald Trump is coming to the G20 basically to get more votes for the election that he's going to face in about a year and a half's time. And that means he's basically got to get his way over that of the other leaders. So if he gets his way, the other leaders lose, very frankly. And this is the dynamic that he's going to try in the G20. Now, I don't have very much hope for a simple reason. Take Iran as an example. The European countries are all supporting the JCPOA, but they're not doing anything about it. They are in fact supporting the United States by withdrawing from Iran and withdrawing investment from Iran. Even India has stopped oil purchases from Iran, even though Iranian crude is ideally suited for many Indian refineries, and Iran is an old friend of India. The same with Japan. Japan is unlikely to basically want to confront the United States, whoever is the president. So the reality of the situation is that at the moment, because of the immense power of America, Trump does have some aces. But playing that hand is going to weaken that hand. And this is actually the problem facing Trump. That there are some weapons that once you use the weapon, you become much weaker as a result. And this is what I think is being played out today. But so far the G20 is concerned, I see Trump being very aggressive, and I see most of the others being very diplomatic in dealing with him.
Mr. Trump, do you see the rule of the jungle will be the rule for this year's G20 summit? Are you as pessimistic as some of your colleagues?
Hopefully we are not there yet. But if we cannot restore the sense of international coordination and the sense of multilateral forum to discuss and address pressing issues, that may be the direction of travel going forward. But let me get back to the point of multipolar world. I think that with the U.S. Pitching and practicing unilateralism, it is clear that the rest of the world have to find a way to fill in the void and to arrange for things that then can help them and their economy to continue to function, to grow, and to prosper. And therefore, I see in the next period, at the expense of the multilateral trading system represented by the WTO, we will see a proliferation of regional bilateral trading arrangements also with the U.S. Taking place. And I think that the way things will shape up. Clearly, in my view, a global trading order is far more superior to a series of fragmented regional and bilateral trading agreements, which will produce at best a second best outcome for the global community. But that is the way we are shaping toward.
Will multilateral trade still be the fabrics that provide nutrition for this multilateral platform and also for a multipolar world?
Well, the world economic system is now still mainstreamed by the aftermath of the Second World War, and it went through the Cold War, and now it helped the globalization, but now under a new era, it needs a lot more reform. It seems that the world is not going to be fragmented, but regional collaboration is really the way to go. Before we really found a new instrument to completely reform the current world economic order, like WTO or IMF or World Bank.
Right. Before we go, and also a serious question, I want to invite your expertise, all of you. We used to live in a world after the Cold War in which there's one ultimate power such as that of the United States that has the ultimate economic clout and also the geopolitical power. However, things have been evolving, but that is very crucial if we could start doing something. Where should we start? And why would they become part of the instrumental foundation for the next few steps to be built? That is the question. How much will this G20 be able to provide even some hint about that? I want to have your views here. Professor Liu first.
You know, after the Second World War, why America became so strong? Because they kept the country open, they support innovation, and they support international liberalism, and they try to build a fabric that can combine most part of the world for trade, investment, educational exchanges, etc. But now it seems that Donald Trump is leading this nation to the opposite direction. So that is really the beginning to see a declining of the U.S. leadership and a U.S. glamour to investors, even students, and politicians in the other part of the world.
So your point is?
If you really want to be a responsible leadership and make your country really, keep the country really great again and continually great, so you gotta be having an open mind and taking the interest of the whole global community into consideration to earn respect, not really fear.
Well, Washington is losing respect, no doubt about that. Nobody is arguing against that. The question really is, will other leadership be able to play bigger role and more supporting role for the international community to deal with some of the biggest issues? That is the question, Mr. Slobodka.
Yeah, I don't see that this transition is happening yet from a unipolar world to a multipolar. It has begun, but it's still in the early stages, and that's why the U.S. is using its economic and its military heft, particularly under Donald Trump, to try to beat the rest of the world into new deals on trade and everything to maintain that power at some semblance of what it once was. A real changes in the world will not come because of that until the rest of the world moves away from the use of the dollar as the most powerful reserve currency of the world. And of course, nothing's going to come out of that G20 to help move in that direction, except if Trump continues to badly overplay his hand and force other countries to start trading with each other outside of the dollar sphere. And that's my hope, is that Trump will continue to overplay his hand like the nationalist bully he is.
Professor Nalapat.
Well, I'm very worried about what's happening in Iran. I think it's completely unnecessary. Venezuela, these are two large oil-producing countries that have had to have their oil exports slowed down or almost stopped. And this is raising the price of oil. This is leading to economic problems in China, in Japan, in South Korea, in India. So frankly, Japan, India, South Korea and China have common interests regarding Iran, but the sad reality is that these countries are not really finding the courage, if I may say so, to come together and take a stand on this question of Iran or Venezuela. Now, as previously the Russian speaker has said, as of now, Donald Trump is still able to ensure that others listen to him, even if it is against their interests. But how long is that going to last? You know, Well, I mean, zero-sum games can last up to a point. The Europeans did it for a very long time. But today, Asia is much bigger than Europe in terms of economic growth. From the 1980s onwards, the percentage share of America in the global GDP is falling year after year. And today, it's much lower than it was even in the 90s. So changes are taking place that are inevitable.
Will this year's G20 summit, my question once again, Mr. Trump from the U.S., be able to be a little step forward in terms of the world negotiating out a way forward from the earlier practice of having one ultimate power?
I think that given the unilateralism practiced by the U.S., forum like the G20, in my view, has become even more important than before, because that is a tacit and regular forum for leaders of the 20 developed and developing countries to really sit down and discuss substantive issues. I think that therefore, going forward, future countries holding the chair of the G20 can have the opportunity to show their leadership by trying to bring together meaningful agenda, have good discussion, and use it to remind the key countries, U.S. and China in particular, that they really need to get their acts together.
Han Tran, Madhav Nalapat, Mark Slobodka, and Liu Baocheng. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us for this round of discussion. We're looking forward to hearing the results of this year's G20 summit. And with that, we're coming to the end of today's discussion. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. Good night.